Hey gang, Dre back at it once again with a brand new video for you on the Motorsport 101 YouTube channel, and it's something for a brand new series I call the Power Ranking series. Now, this is something that's not going to be a regular thing. It's probably going to be once every 3 to 4 rounds over the course of the season. But I wanted to get a better idea and do a better version of Formula 1's Power Rankings list to determine who I think the best and the worst teams in Formula 1 are over the course of a season. Trust me, it's not going to be me just running down the Constructors' Championship table. I've got some pound for pound arguments to weigh up in terms of team strength, driver strength, who's performing, who's, performing pound for pound better than I think they should be, expectations, etc, etc. I'm just taking everything into account rather than just what the scoreboard necessarily says. I got this idea from Jared Kimber, who does fantastic cricket videos. He did his own version of this for the Indian Premier League. If you're a big cricket fan, I'll leave a link to Jared's channel down below in the description. He's a good friend of mine, well worth backing if you're into your cricket. But I wanted to do a Formula 1 version. I didn't see anybody else really do this on the vast realms of Formula 1 YouTube. So here is my first power rankings list for the season, and look, this is going to be controversial. There are going to be opinions here that you're probably not going to agree with. Please tell me why I'm wrong in the description down below. I want you to disagree with me on this. I find these sorts of perspectives fascinating. So yeah, apologies in advance if I put your team too high or too low, depending on how you feel about them. So at number 1, I have Ferrari right now, and Ferrari, well, their execution until Imola was more or less flawless. Yes, they took full advantage of a couple of nasty DNFs for their main rivals at the moment, which we'll get to shortly, but you can only beat what they put in front of you, and 2 pole positions and 2 race wins, including a Grand Slam from Charles Leclerc in Australia, was exceptional in terms of sheer outright performance. Charles Leclerc is performing as well as we've ever seen him. Look, he's the sort of guy that I know it's very easy for people to dunk on him because he makes one big mistake a year and everybody jumps on him. It's really, really weird how the internet gets behind Charles. But overall, he's been, I think, as good as anyone in the championship this year. This is his first real test at the very highest level as a true title contender, and he's ticked pretty much every box so far. Yes, Imola was not ideal, he made a mistake, but, I mean, losing only 3 places, it's not a catastrophe, it's not a disaster. He's got a race in hand on Max Verstappen still, and in the grand scheme of things, losing 7 points, it's the same as finishing second behind Max if he was winning a race anyway. So I don't think it's a massive disaster that he had that Imola spin. And look, there is no harsher critic of Charles Leclerc in Formula 1 than Charles himself. He probably went back to his garage and started kicking himself the moment he got back there. So yeah, I don't think Charles has got too much to be concerned about. The car looks fast. Yes, it's porpoising, but that mechanical grip and that low speed grip is what's really making it fly right now. A little bit concerned about the tyre graining. The sprint showed that Red Bull was better on its soft tyres towards the end of that race, but overall the Ferrari still looks damn solid. Carlos Sainz is going to be an interesting man to watch over the course of the next few races as well. Carlos got a lot of credit for basically being the best midfielder last year when Ferrari were more of the 3rd ranked team. But the scoreboard kind of didn't tell the full picture. Carlos Sainz was 13.9 down in qualifying last year, and he was 14.6 in races they both finished down last season. The problem was that Leclerc did not score points in those big weekends that Sainz did. So far this season, I think the scoreboard and the form book are a lot closer together. Sainz was awful in Australia, had probably his worst weekend in Formula 1. And yeah, it wasn't his fault in Imola. The sprint kind of spared his blushes from a poor crash in Q2. And then, of course, he was taken out by Daniel Ricciardo. So you can't really pin that one on him, but it's not a good sign. Or is it? It might actually be a good thing that Ferrari have a proper 1-2 driver structure. I thought having the best combined lineup might be a good thing. It might also work against them. We know Red Bull are all in on Max Verstappen running their team, rather than having an equal partnership. If Sainz is accidentally slower than Leclerc going forward over the course of the year, that might be the best result for all parties concerned. Keep an eye on that going forward. Sainz being the number 2 here is not an issue whatsoever. Trust me. At number 2, I have Red Bull, and well, the big reason why is simply because 2 big mechanical DNFs to start the year. When Verstappen was running second in both those races, that would have been an easy 36 points at least that Red Bull had lost off those 2 rounds alone. The reliability might be a concern going forward. I mean, it's still early days. But if Red Bull go on to not win either major title this year, we're going to be circling those dates in Bahrain and Australia as to reasons why it didn't work out in the end. Besides that, and that's really the only reason why Red Bull are second, because besides that, Verstappen has been as good as he's always been, just like he was last year. He's maximising results when he doesn't have the best car on the day, like we saw in Australia and Bahrain. He would have comfortably been second on both those occasions. And of course, he's won the races he did win. He had a very tight tactical fight with Charles at Saudi Arabia, which he would go on to win. And he dominated Imola. This is the good thing about Red Bull at the moment. They seem to have taken 10 kilos off their car for Imola, and it suddenly made them so much faster. Ferrari were completely beaten this past weekend. They just did not have an answer for Max over the course of the entire race distance. That is something to hang your hat on right now. Their tyre wear looks better, Verstappen is still in form, and low-key, Sergio Perez is looking like a better rear gunner than he did last year. Yes, the head-to-head matchups will look bad because he's never going to beat Verstappen on raw pace alone, but that was never why he was hired in the first place. He was hired to back Max up. And so far, this season, he's done a good job of doing that. He's not really put a foot wrong in race trim. He's maximised results where he can with the 2 second places he's had this year already. And he led in Saudi Arabia comfortably for a little while until that safety car came out. It looks like Perez is a fair bit more comfortable with the Red Bull setup than he was last year. That's a very good sign if Red Bull want to go one better than last year and win both championships. Red Bull, I think, obviously momentum-wise, are probably a little bit better than Ferrari, but those 2 big DNFs are the reason why I've got them second. Number 3, I've got Mercedes, and don't let the scoreboard fool you. They are a distant third from where the big 2 are right now. I'll put it into perspective for you. George Russell had a brilliant start on Sunday, had relatively clean running, and I think only had to pass 1 car on the day, and that was Kevin Magnussen's Haas. He finished 42 seconds off the win, and that was with the top 3 all taking an extra pit stop to go for fastest lap attempts. Mercs are a long, long way back. And don't let Nico Rosberg's trolling of the man fool you. Lewis Hamilton is not the issue with this team at all. He's had 2 unfortunately timed safety cars that have made a mess of 2 of the Grand Prix he's been in this season. Look, Lewis probably isn't in his prime anymore. I don't think he's the Lewis of maybe 2016-17 where he was at his absolute best week in, week out. But he's not the reason this team has struggled despite the scoreboard saying otherwise. I think that's more down to the fact that yes, Lewis has been unlucky, but George has ticked every box. He's answered every test asked of him so far since joining Mercedes. He came from a Williams team that it was hard to evaluate just how good he was because his teammates were Nicholas Latifi and Robert Kubica, 2 guys that probably shouldn't be in Formula 1 at this point. There was always going to be question marks asked about George coming in at this level, but he's been excellent. He's only made 1 mistake really, and that was in Bahrain qualifying, and he recovered to finish where he probably should have finished anyway. All 4 races, all 4 top 5 finishes, including a podium in Australia, and yeah, he's answered every test so far that's come about him since joining Mercedes. He's been really, really good. He's not really put a foot wrong, and he's been the ideal second driver that Mercedes have probably always wanted, even more so than Valtteri. The problem is, their car stinks. It porpoises like crazy. They've thrown a bunch of upgrades at it, and none of them seems to have fixed that basic underlying problem. This is probably not going to be a championship team, even if they fix this porpoising in time. If they don't fix it in the next 3 or 4 rounds, it's not going to matter how good their car is afterwards, because the front 2 will be so far in front of them, it's not going to matter. Mercs are running out of time to fix this problem if they want to go after their 9th straight Constructors title, and Hamilton wants to go after number 8 this year. Like, It's not a good sign when people on Twitter are asking me every race, do you think Mercs have fixed the car yet? I'm actually surprised that not enough people have spoken about how good Alfa Romeo has been so far this season. They're my number 4 team right now, and this may surprise some people, but if you look at the last 12 months on where this team has been, none of this should have worked. Like, they were a team that was definitely caught out by some of the freak occurrences of 2021 to fall behind Williams, but they blew this team up. They didn't exactly go for sexy big name drivers to replace the outgoing Raikkonen and Giovinazzi. They brought in Valtteri Bottas, who was good but was largely shown the door at Mercedes, and Zhou Guanyu, who was okay in Formula 2 but he wasn't spectacular. And yet, despite all that, so far this season they've been excellent. Valtteri Bottas has finished in the points in every race he's finished in so far this year and was 5th in Imola. 5th in an Alfa. That's really, really good results there. I know it's very easy to dunk on Valtteri, but when you're comparing him to Lewis Hamilton for the majority of his career, you're never going to win that fight with people on the internet. Valtteri's found his level, he's found the team that appreciates him and is prepared to build around him, and they're already reaping the results. Zhou Guanyu has been really solid so far this year. He hasn't been spectacular by any stretch of the imagination. He's not one of these golden generation youngsters like Norris or Russell or Leclerc has been in the last half decade. But he's largely kept his nose dry and not made very many mistakes. And look, as a rookie, that's absolutely fine. Hopefully the speed will come down the road. He's a little bit far behind Valtteri than I would have liked, but as a rookie, I don't think he's really done all that much wrong so far. Alfa Romeo are really, really solid right now, and they deserve huge credit for how far they've come in the last year. But I've got McLaren 5th at the moment, and that's mostly because they started the season really badly. Like, they were 3 seconds a lap off the pace in Bahrain, and that was a horror show off the back of their last test. There was genuine concerns about all of the Mercedes-powered cars so far this year, and well, McLaren's turned it around really quickly. I think Andreas Seidel's tried to play down their improvements, saying that, look, we don't actually think we've got anything, I think we've just played to our strengths on certain tracks, but of all the teams within this season so far, McLaren is clearly the one that's made the most progress in-house. I mean, Lando Norris getting a podium mostly on merit. The only real outlandish result was Sainz being taken out of the equation, and then of course Leclerc making his mistake. Norris just kept his nose dry, made a couple of good starts, and basically drove really well. Like, Norris is a borderline elite level driver. He was, for me, the first half driver of 2021. He tailed off a little bit towards the end, but he's keeping that first half form going into this season so far. Constantly leading that McLaren team. You can't really ask for much more out of LN4 at the moment. I think he's a top 5 driver in the world now, and he's continuing to prove his worth. The win will come with Lando at some point down the road. Daniel Ricciardo, well, he's not bad as a backup man, but there's going to be rumblings going around now starting to think that McLaren might be able to get a better second driver for less of a price. He's had 25 plus races at McLaren now, and he still looks like he's a distant way behind Lando Norris. And Imola probably didn't help that when he got a bit too aggressive off the start, made an error, and then took Carlos Sainz out. I know he was very apologetic afterwards, but it ruined Ricciardo's race. And when your teammate's finishing 3rd, that's not a good sign, and the midfield looks very competitive this year. You can't afford to have a lagging behind second driver. Daniel Ricciardo, I've always believed in him, I've always given him the benefit of the doubt, but you signed him to a 3-year deal, and there's not been a lot of good to come out of that side of the garage since joining that team. Alpine are my P6 team, and well, they're sort of just there, really. Not much about them has leapt off the page so far this season, but I do want to mention that Esteban Ocon is having a very, very good season, and again, not very many people are talking about it. Finished the first 3 rounds of the year 7th, 6th and 7th in a team that's currently very mid-table by the looks of it. like, Ocon and Alonso were very evenly matched last year. You could barely split them. Alonso had slightly more points in the end, but Ocon was more than worthy of his match, you could say. Ocon's now starting to make this team his own. He's beaten Alonso in all 4 rounds this year. Yes, Imola was a bit fluky, obviously, because of the damage that Alonso had suffered. But this is very quickly becoming Ocon's team. The problem is, I don't know how good this team actually is. I don't think it's got enough out there to really be challenging for major honours or anything along those lines. The one that got away seems to be Australia. Fernando Alonso had 2 sectors in that qualifying free session that probably would have put him on the front row. Even if you fall a little bit and say Alpine finishes 5th on the day, we're probably speaking about this team in much more positive terms. Instead, Ocon's gone completely off the radar, and Alonso really hasn't got a lot to show for this season so far. I want to see Ocon in a better team than this. Alpine promised the world title within 5 years. This is now year 7. They've won 1 Grand Prix, and they are still roughly where they've always been, middle of the pack. Another close call for 7th, but I've gone with Haas here in the number 7 spot, and to be honest, it's mostly down for 2 reasons. Number 1, their 2021 tank job seemingly has worked. Haas has seemingly got a decent car underneath them this year. Again, K-Mag's been in the points 3 times out of 4 so far this season, and has been a revelation, a huge shot in the arm for the Haas team. Like, Magnussen has proven that last year's lineup just wasn't very strong driver-wise. They've got a proven commodity that has driven for that team in the past and driven well for that team in the past, and Magnussen's come in on short notice and been outstanding for them. Haas are back in the points, and they should be off the bottom of the constructors for this year, as long as they don't hit into a complete disaster. It looks like tanking 2021 has worked out for them. There is question marks over Mick Schumacher, though. Everybody was penciling him in as a future Ferrari driver and saying that, look, oh, Carlos Sainz is just a stopgap. It turns out Carlos Sainz has been really good in a Ferrari for the most part so far since joining that team. And now Mick's getting smacked around a little bit. Now he's got a proper driver in the actual other side of the garage, rather than Nikita Mazepin, who we know was dreadful and out of his depth. Mick needs to show some proper improvement with this car and start getting in the points, like his teammate has. Otherwise, there will be question marks asked about the young German's future. But overall, this is definitely a much better team than they were last season. The testing speed was a little bit of a red herring, but not by enough to drop them out of the points. Good turnaround from Haas. Number 8 for me is Alpha Tauri, and again, another hard team to place, but I think Haas, given where they were last year and the gains they've made going into this season, they've impressed me more than Alpha Tauri, who just seem to have slipped a little bit in the grand scheme of things. I mean, they're sitting there 7th in the Constructors' Championship, ahead of Haas by 1 point, but I think given that Haas were bottom last year, and Alpha's just kind of remained a bit stagnant. In fact, I think they've actually slipped in some key areas. Most specifically, 1-lap speed. Pierre Gasly's average qualifying position last season was 6.8. It's now 11.8. They are, on average, about 5 spots lower than they were last year in terms of overall pace. Now, the sample size is small, there's time for that to improve over the course of the year, and they still have the best power unit in the field alongside the factory team. But I just don't think Alpha Tauri have done very much to basically stand out in a sea of a very loaded midfield. I don't think Gasly has been as strong as he's been the last 2 years in Formula 1 so far. But I do think if there's one small positive, I think Yuki Tsunoda is taking the sport a bit more seriously. He looks fitter, I think he's a little bit sharper, and I think his racecraft has genuinely improved. The weekend we just had in Imola, where he finished 7th from 12th on the grid, that might be Yuki's best weekend in Formula 1 to date, ironically at the same place last year where the wheels started to fall off his rookie season. If Tsunoda can start to back up Gasly a little bit more, which let's not forget right now in the standings, Yuki's ahead of Gasly, A more balanced team could do AlphaTauri some favours in the long run, especially when it comes to both guys driving for their jobs. Gasly wanting that Red Bull seat back, but not really doing much to justify it off the back of this season, and Tsunoda literally driving for his life right now with Liam Lawson behind him in F2. AlphaTauri are struggling though, and this is probably not what they were hoping for off the back of last year. Now, Aston Martin are my number 9 team, and look, I'm not going to go into too much detail on Aston Martin, because I already made an entire video talking about their struggles, which you can see up there in the cards. But, yeah, this team has probably taken the biggest stagnant drop out of that midfield we've seen so far this season. Look, they were great in Imola, they got both cars in the points, Sebastian Vettel was an arguable driver of the day candidate in 8th. But when Vettel is talking about celebrating an 8th place like it's a win, that probably tells you all you need to know about where Aston Martin are as a factory right now and as a team and their overall pace. They're bad. They are really bad. The Hulkenberg switcheroo didn't work like it did when they were Racing Point. Vettel is still taking his time to get up to speed in the car. That was a really solid performance in Imola, don't get me wrong. But the previous 3 rounds suggests these guys are fighting in the team positions and not in the points on a frequent basis. Maybe there's more to come from them, but this team looks like they are a long, long way off where they should be, and I think they're going to be in for a hard time this year. And finally, Williams. Now, they probably went into the season in most people's prediction lists as being the number 10 ranked team, alongside maybe Haas if you didn't buy into their testing times, but yeah, when we're already experiencing deja vu when the back of a Williams has caught fire in Imola, it probably says a lot about where they're at. They're just not particularly quick. However, I will give them this. Alex Albon has come back and has driven very well for Williams. He's probably punched them well above their weight so far. So much so, I was actually tempted to put Aston Martin at the bottom of the pile here. I do think the issue with Williams is Nicholas Latifi than anything else, but let's put it to you this way. If you painted Alex Albon's helmet black and made him a little bit taller, you might be mistaken for thinking George Russell was still in that car. He's done a very solid job, Albon. He's had a brilliant tactical game in Australia to get a point for them right at the back of that race, and then again to finish in 11th in Imola. That's really strong driving for Albon to get the maximum out of a car that most people think is a donkey. I mean, when you're shaving paint off the car to save a few 100 grams here and there, that should probably tell you a lot again about where Williams are at as a team. And I think the goodwill on Nicholas Latifi is just about run out at this point. I think people were prepared to give him a bit of a chance after scoring some points for Williams last year. But on the whole, if it's one thing when George Russell, who we all knew was an A+ prospect, is going to come in and beat you. But when Alex Albon is doing it, a guy who, let's be honest, people didn't look at him too fondly after the Red Bull run. For Albon to come back, look as strong as he has, and then smack Latifi around again is just not a good sign. And it's getting to the point where Latifi's probably outstayed his welcome in F1, and Williams might need a better second driver. Just not sure where that's going to come from at the moment. And yeah, that'll do it for this first Power Rankings edition. I'd love to know where you guys think the teams are at and where the drivers are at the moment. I'd love to hear what you guys think. Did I miss anything? Is there anything else I should have considered? Where have you got the teams ranked right about now? I'd love to see your lists as always. But until then, I've been Dre Harrison. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you guys soon. Sayonara.